You know, after more than 40 years sitting on this bench, I've learned that the hardest cases aren't the ones with the biggest fines or the loudest arguments. The hardest cases are the quiet ones, the ones where someone walks into my courtroom carrying a weight they never asked for, doing the best they can with what little energy they have left. The day a mother stood before me with her special needs son by her side, I knew immediately this wasn't just a case about a violation. It was a story about love, sacrifice, and how the justice system chooses whether to lift people up or push them down. Let me tell you exactly what happened that day, because it reminded me why compassion belongs in every courtroom. But before I tell you this whole story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something that needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I've been a judge in Providence for over 40 years now, and my mornings follow a rhythm that time hasn't changed. I wake up early, usually before the alarm. I make my coffee strong and black, no sugar, no cream. My wife still tells me it's too bitter, but it's how I've always liked it. I sit at the kitchen table, read the paper, and prepare myself for the responsibility that comes with deciding people's futures, sometimes in ways they'll never fully understand. My father used to tell me that a judge doesn't just enforce laws. He said a judge holds people's lives in his hands for a moment, and what you do in that moment matters. Those words have stayed with me every day I've worn this robe. By 8:15, I was walking through the courthouse doors like I've done thousands of times. Christina greeted me with a smile and handed me my coffee. She told me the docket was full. I thanked her and took a sip, feeling that familiar warmth steady me. As I reviewed the files, most looked routine: missed payments, minor infractions, technical violations. But one file made me slow down, not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. A short description, a mother, a missed obligation. A note scribbled in the margin that read, "Defendant appears with adult son." I leaned back in my chair for a moment and stared at the file. Something about it felt heavier than the rest. Experience has taught me to listen to that feeling. When court began, the first few cases moved quickly. Apologies, explanations, rulings. I listened, decided, and moved on. But my attention kept drifting back to that file. Then Christina called the next case. I looked up and I saw them standing together near the podium. The mother stood slightly in front, like a shield. Her son stood close to her side, his hand gripping her sleeve tightly. He was a grown man, but his posture and expression told a different story. He looked overwhelmed, unsure, safe only because she was there. I felt my chest tighten. I asked them to step forward, and they did. The mother guided her son gently, whispering something to him as they walked. When they reached the podium, she adjusted his position so he could stand comfortably. She never let go of him completely. I asked her to state her name. Her voice was calm, but I could hear exhaustion underneath it, the kind that comes not from one bad night, but from years of carrying responsibility without relief. I asked her why she was there. She took a breath before answering. That breath told me everything. She said she had missed a payment. I asked her to explain. She spoke carefully, choosing her words with precision. She said she wasn't denying responsibility. She said she understood why she was there. She just hoped I would understand her situation. As she spoke, I watched her son. He avoided eye contact with everyone but her. When the room got quiet, he shifted closer. She placed a reassuring hand on his arm without missing a word of her explanation. She told me her son has special needs. She said he depends on her for almost everything: daily routines, appointments, stability. She said she hadn't had a full night's sleep in years. I felt that familiar tightening in my throat. She explained that the missed payment wasn't intentional. It happened during a week when her son had a medical emergency, Hospital visits, medication changes, paperwork, exhaustion. She said time slipped away, and by the time she realized, it was too late. I asked her if she had ever missed a payment before. She shook her head immediately. She said never. She said she prides herself on doing things the right way. I believed her. I looked at the record. Clean, consistent, responsible. One lapse in years of compliance. That mattered. I asked her how old her son was. She told me. I asked her if he lived with her. She said yes. She said he always would. I watched her say that without hesitation. No bitterness, no complaint, just acceptance. I asked her son how he was doing, not legally, personally. He looked at his mother before answering. She nodded encouragingly. He said he was okay. His voice was quiet but sincere. The room was completely silent now. I could feel everyone listening, not out of curiosity, but respect. This wasn't a spectacle. This was life. I leaned forward slightly and told her I appreciated her honesty. I told her that courts see people at difficult moments and that context matters. I could see relief flicker across her face just briefly. I hadn't made my decision yet. I needed to hear more. I needed to understand the full picture, because this case wasn't about punishment. It was about whether the system recognized the invisible work she did every single day. And I want you to stay with me, because in the next part she shares something about her life that made me pause longer than I ever expected and made this case one I will never forget. I remember looking at her after she finished explaining the missed payment, and I didn't rush to speak. Silence can be important. It gives people room to breathe, and sometimes it tells you more than words ever could. I could see she was bracing herself, like she had spent years preparing for moments where the world might judge her without understanding. I asked her how long she had been caring for her son on her own. She didn't answer right away. She thought about it for a moment, then said, his whole life. She said it gently, without resentment, but the weight of it settled heavily in the room. I asked her to tell me more about him, not because I needed it for the record, but because I needed to understand who was standing beside her. She smiled slightly when she talked about him. That smile told me everything I needed to know about their bond. She told me about his routines, how structure helps him feel safe, how changes can be overwhelming. She told me about the appointments, the paperwork, the constant planning that never really stops. She said that even small disruptions can turn into big challenges for him. As she spoke, I watched her son closely. He listened intently, eyes focused on the floor, fingers twisting the fabric of her sleeve. Every so often he glanced up at her just to make sure she was still there. Each time she gave him a small nod, reassuring him without words. I felt my chest tighten again. I asked her if she worked outside the home. She nodded and said yes, part-time. She said full-time wasn't possible because her son needs her throughout the day. She explained that balancing work, caregiving, and life often felt like trying to keep too many plates spinning at once. I asked her if she had help. She shook her head. She said family lived far away. She said resources existed, but navigating them was a job in itself. She said most days it was just the two of them. I believed her. I asked her what happened the week the payment was missed. Her voice softened. She told me her son had a medical emergency late one night, an ambulance, hours in the emergency room, fear she couldn't put into words. She said that week blurred together. Sleep came in short pieces. Paperwork piled up. She said she thought she had paid everything, but one thing slipped through. I could hear the guilt in her voice, heavier than the fine itself. I told her something then. I told her that caregiving is work, even when it doesn't come with a paycheck. I told her that what she was doing mattered. She looked up at me when I said that, eyes widening just slightly, like no one had ever said it out loud to her before. I asked her son if he liked living with his mom. He looked at her again before answering, then nodded. He said yes. He said she makes him feel safe. His words were simple, but they landed hard. The room was completely still. I thought about how many people carry invisible responsibilities that never show up on paperwork, how many sacrifices go unnoticed because they don't fit neatly into forms or records. I asked her if she understood the potential consequences of the missed payment. She said yes. She said she had been worried about it for weeks. She said she didn't sleep well, knowing she would have to come here. I nodded. Fear has a way of living quietly inside people long before it ever shows on the surface. I explained the law to her clearly. I told her what the fine represented. I told her what could happen if it went unpaid. I didn't sugarcoat it. Honesty is important, even in compassionate moments. She listened closely, nodding, absorbing every word. I could tell she wasn't looking for a way out. She was looking for understanding. I paused for a moment and leaned back in my chair. I thought about my own family, about how my wife and I leaned on each other over the years, about how much harder everything would have been alone. I felt a deep respect for the strength it takes to carry that kind of responsibility day after day. Before I went any further, let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever seen someone doing everything they can, yet still fall behind because life demanded more than they had to give? Leave me a comment and tell me your story. And if this is resonating with you, hit that like button for me. I turned back to her and asked if she thought she could manage the payment going forward if given some flexibility. She didn't answer quickly. She thought carefully. Then she said yes. She said it wouldn't be easy, but she would do everything she could. That honesty mattered to me. She didn't promise miracles. She promised effort. I asked her if she had ever asked for help before. She shook her head again. She said she was used to managing on her own. She said asking for help always felt like admitting failure. I told her something I wish more people heard. I told her that needing help doesn't mean you've failed. It means you've been strong for a very long time. Tears filled her eyes. She tried to hold them back, but they came anyway. Her son noticed immediately. He reached up and placed his hand over hers. She squeezed it gently. That moment stayed with me. I hadn't made my decision yet, but I knew this case was about more than enforcing a rule. It was about whether the system could recognize love and sacrifice when it stood right in front of it. And just as I was about to move toward a ruling, something unexpected happened. Someone else in the courtroom stood up, and what they shared added a layer to this story that made it even harder to ignore the humanity at its center. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll tell you who spoke up, what they revealed, and why it changed the entire tone of the room. I had just finished explaining the possible outcomes when I noticed movement near the front row. At first, I thought someone was simply adjusting their seat, but then I saw a woman stand up slowly, clutching a folder to her chest like it gave her courage. She looked nervous, like she hadn't planned to speak, but felt compelled to anyway. I looked at her and asked if she needed something. She cleared her throat and said she hoped it was okay if she spoke. Her voice was shaky but respectful. I nodded and told her she could go ahead. Courtrooms are places of order, but they're also places of truth, and something told me this mattered. She introduced herself and explained that she was the social worker assigned to the family. That immediately caught my attention. I asked her why she was there. She said she had taken time off because she knew the mother was anxious about this case and didn't want her to feel alone. I watched the mother as the social worker spoke. Her shoulders dropped just a little, like someone had finally shared the load she'd been carrying. The social worker spoke calmly and clearly. She said she had worked with many families over the years, but this one stood out. She said the mother was one of the most consistent, devoted caregivers she had ever seen. She said appointments were never missed, paperwork was always completed, and the son's needs were always put first. I could hear the respect in her voice. She told me that the mother rarely asked for anything. She said even when services were offered, the mother hesitated, worried about taking resources away from someone else who might need them more. That detail stayed with me. I asked the social worker about the son. She smiled gently when she spoke about him. She said he had made progress over the years because of his mother's dedication. She said consistency and love had done what no program alone ever could. I glanced at the son as she spoke. He stood quietly, listening, holding his mother's sleeve like an anchor. He didn't seem confused by what was happening. He seemed protected by her presence. The social worker then said something that made the room go completely still. She said that the week of the missed payment had been one of the hardest she had ever seen for the family. She said the medical emergency had been serious, and for a moment there had been real fear. I felt my chest tighten again. She said that despite everything, the mother never complained. She never asked for exceptions. She simply focused on keeping her son calm and safe. She said the missed payment wasn't negligence. It was exhaustion. That word carried weight. I thanked the social worker for speaking up and asked her one final question. I asked her if she believed the mother would follow through on any plan the court put in place. She didn't hesitate. She said she trusted her completely. I nodded slowly and turned my attention back to the mother. She looked overwhelmed now, not by fear, but by being seen. Sometimes having your effort acknowledged is more emotional than being criticized. I asked her if she knew the social worker was going to speak. She shook her head. She looked genuinely surprised. I asked her how it felt hearing that. She took a moment before answering and said it felt like someone finally understood. That answer stayed with me. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. I thought about how often caregivers disappear into the background of society, how their work is constant, essential, and rarely recognized, and how easily the system can overlook them if it only looks at violations instead of context. Before I continue, let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever seen someone give everything they have to care for another person without expecting anything in return? Leave me a comment and tell me about it. And if you're still with me, hit that like button for me. I turned back to the case file. I looked at the missed payment again, and then I looked at the years of compliance that came before it. Patterns matter, effort matters, intent matters. I explained to the mother that the law gives judges discretion for situations exactly like this. I told her discretion doesn't mean ignoring rules. It means applying them wisely. I asked her what support would actually help her right now, not theoretically, practically. She hesitated, then said flexibility. She said time mattered more than money in her situation. I nodded. That made sense. I asked her son how he was feeling. He looked at her again before answering, then said he was okay. He said he liked being with his mom. He said she helps him when things feel too loud. That sentence stayed with me. I could feel the courtroom absorbing the full picture now. This wasn't about a missed payment anymore. It was about a family held together by love and patience under constant strain. I knew I was close to a decision, but I wasn't ready yet. Something inside me was telling me to slow down just a little more, to make sure nothing important was overlooked, and that instinct proved right. Because just as I was about to speak again, I noticed a detail in the file that I hadn't focused on before. A detail that explained why this family had so little margin for error and why punishment would do more harm than good. When I realized what it was, I felt a quiet shock move through me. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll tell you what I discovered, why it mattered so deeply, and how it shaped the decision I ultimately made from this bench. I picked up the file again, this time with a different kind of attention. When you've been doing this as long as I have, you learn that sometimes the most important details aren't highlighted or underlined. They're tucked quietly into the margins, waiting for someone to actually look. That's when I saw it. There was a note about benefits, not a complaint, not an appeal, just a short line that explained the family was in the middle of a benefits review. Anyone who's been through that process knows what it means. Delays, paperwork, waiting, uncertainty, and often a temporary gap where support hasn't arrived yet, but expenses never stop. I felt a quiet frustration rise in me, not at anyone in particular, but at how easily people can fall into those gaps. I looked up at the mother and asked her about it. She nodded slowly. She said yes, they were waiting. She said everything had been submitted on time, but the review was taking longer than expected. She said she was doing her best to cover the difference until it was resolved. I could hear how tired she was just from that explanation. I asked her how long they had been waiting. She told me several months. I asked her if she had followed up. She said many times. She said every call ended with the same answer: please be patient. Please be. Patience is hard when you're already stretched thin. I leaned back in my chair and thought about how often systems expect patience from people who have very little left to give. I thought about how a missed payment in that context isn't carelessness, it's math. And sometimes the math doesn't work, no matter how careful you are. I asked her if the delay had been resolved yet. She shook her head. She said no. She said she was hopeful, but every day felt like walking a tightrope. I looked at her son again. He stood quietly, still holding on to her. His world depended on her stability, and her stability depended on systems moving at a pace she couldn't control. That mattered. I asked the social worker if she was aware of the delay. She nodded. She confirmed it. She said the family had done everything right. She said the delay was administrative, not the mother's fault. I felt my jaw tighten. I've always believed that justice has to account for reality, not just rules. And the reality here was clear. Punishing this family for something they couldn't control would solve nothing and risk everything. I turned back to the mother and told her that I appreciated her honesty. I told her that navigating systems while caregiving is one of the hardest things a person can do. She looked up at me then, eyes full, but steady. I asked her if she had ever felt close to giving up. She hesitated, then she nodded. She said yes. She said there were nights she cried quietly so her son wouldn't hear. She said she didn't want him to feel her fear. I felt my throat tighten again. I told her something I don't say lightly. I told her that the strength she showed every day was extraordinary. I told her that the law should never be used to break someone who is already holding everything together with sheer will. The room was completely still. No one shifted, no one whispered. Everyone understood what was at stake. Before I go any further, let me pause here for just a moment. Have you ever watched someone hold their world together while barely holding themselves up? Leave me a comment and tell me what you saw. And if this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me, hit that like button for me. I turned back to the fine. I looked at the amount. I thought about what it represented to the system and what it represented to this family. To the system, it was a number. To them, it was a risk they couldn't afford. I asked her what would happen if she had to pay it immediately. She didn't exaggerate. She said it would mean choosing between essentials. She said she would do it if required, but she didn't know how she would recover. That answer stayed with me. I explained to her that the purpose of a fine is to correct behavior, not to create harm. I told her that in her case, there was no behavior to correct. There was only a moment of overload in a life already full of responsibility. I could feel the decision forming, but I wasn't ready to say it yet. I wanted her to understand what I was thinking and why. Transparency matters. I told her that the law allows judges to exercise discretion in cases where strict enforcement would undermine justice. I told her this was one of those cases. Her eyes widened slightly, not with hope yet, with attention. I asked her if she would be willing to work with the court on a plan that focused on stability rather than punishment. She nodded immediately. She said yes. She said she just wanted to keep her son safe and their lives steady. I believed her. I looked at her son and asked him if he trusted his mom. He nodded without hesitation. He said yes. He said she always helps him when things are hard. That was all I needed to hear. I took a deep breath and felt a quiet certainty settle in me. I knew what I was going to do. But before I made it official, I wanted to say something from this bench that I hoped would reach beyond this one case. Something about what justice should look like when families like this stand before it. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll tell you exactly what decision I made, how the room reacted, and why this moment reminded me that helping is sometimes the most powerful form of justice we have. I remember placing both of my hands flat on the bench and taking a slow breath, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to be deliberate. Moments like this deserve care. I looked at the mother, then at her son, and then I looked around the courtroom. Everyone was waiting, not for drama, but for direction. I began by speaking calmly, making sure my words were clear and steady. I told her that I had listened to everything she said. I told her I had reviewed her record carefully. I told her that one missed payment in years of doing everything right did not define her character or her commitment. I could see her shoulders tense, like she was bracing for the rest. I continued. I told her that caring for a child with special needs is not just a responsibility. It's a full-time job layered on top of everything else life demands. I told her that the law must recognize when someone is doing their absolute best under extraordinary circumstances. I told her that instead of punishing her, I was going to help her. Her eyes widened immediately, not with relief yet, with disbelief. I explained my decision carefully. I told her I was reducing the fine significantly. I told her that I was also giving her time, real time that acknowledged her reality instead of ignoring it. I told her the court would work with her, not against her. She covered her mouth with her hand. Tears spilled freely now. She tried to speak, but couldn't at first. Her son noticed right away. He stepped closer to her and wrapped his arm around her waist, holding on like he always did. That moment stopped me. I waited. I always wait. People deserve time to process kindness just as much as they deserve time to process consequences. When she finally spoke, her voice shook. She thanked me, not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. She said she had been so afraid of being punished for something she couldn't control. She said she felt like someone finally saw her. I nodded. I told her that seeing her was part of my job. I turned my attention to her son. I spoke gently so I wouldn't overwhelm him. I told him his mom was doing a very good job. I told him she was taking good care of him. He looked up at her, then back at me, and nodded. A small smile crossed his face. That smile stayed with me. I explained the conditions clearly. I told her what was expected going forward. I told her this wasn't a free pass. It was a chance built on trust and responsibility. She listened carefully, nodding, absorbing every word. I asked her if she felt comfortable with the plan. She said yes. She said she would do everything she could to follow through. I believed her. I looked at Christina. She was watching closely, her expression soft. We've seen a lot together over the years, and moments like this remind us both why we do this work. As the ruling concluded, something unexpected happened. People in the gallery began to stand. Not all at once, quietly, respectfully, no applause, just acknowledgement. I felt my chest tighten. I called the next case, but I'll be honest with you. My focus lingered on that family. Some cases follow you, not because they're unresolved, but because they reveal something true. Later that afternoon, after court had ended, I sat alone in my chambers for a while. I thought about how easily this could have gone differently, a rigid decision, a fine enforced without context, another burden added to someone already carrying too much. I thought about my father again, about how he used to say that justice without mercy is just power wearing a robe. Those words echoed loudly that day. A few weeks passed, then a month. Life moved on, as it always does. But then I received an update. The mother had followed through on the plan. She was communicating. She was staying on track. Progress wasn't perfect, but it was real. That mattered more than perfection. Before I go any further, let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever seen kindness change the direction of someone's life, Or have you ever been on the receiving end of it when you needed it most? Leave me a comment and tell me your story. And if this moment is resonating with you, hit that like button for me. A few months later, I received another update. The benefits review had finally been resolved. Support was restored. Stability returned, slowly but surely. The system had caught up, even if it took too long. I thought about how close this family had come to being crushed by timing alone. One afternoon, as I was leaving the courthouse, I saw them again. They were standing near the entrance, not because they had to be there, but because they wanted to say hello. The mother looked lighter, not because life was easy, but because it was manageable again. She thanked me one more time. I told her she didn't owe me thanks. I told her she had done the hard work. Her son waved at me. That wave meant more than any words, but the story didn't end there. Because several months later, something happened that brought everything full circle. Something that reminded me that when you help one family, you often help more than you realize. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll tell you what I learned after that day, and why this case reaffirmed my belief that justice should always leave room for compassion. Several months after that day, when the seasons had shifted and court had settled back into its familiar rhythm, I found myself thinking about that family again. Not because there was a problem, but because silence in cases like that often means something went right. I've learned that when people stop appearing on the docket, it usually means they're finding their footing. One afternoon, Christina knocked softly on my chamber door and handed me a short update. It wasn't formal, just a note. The mother had completed every step of the plan we put in place. Communication had been consistent. Payments were manageable. No new issues. It was the kind of update that doesn't make headlines, but it means everything. I sat back in my chair and let that sink in. I thought about how fragile progress can be for families living on the edge. One unexpected bill, one missed appointment, one delay in a system moving too slowly. That's all it takes to undo months of effort. And yet, here she was, still standing. A few weeks later, I learned something else. The social worker had shared through proper channels that the mother had finally agreed to accept additional support services, not because she wanted to rely on them forever, but because she realized that strength doesn't mean doing everything alone. That realization can take years. I smiled when I read that. I also learned that her son had begun attending a new program a few days a week. Nothing dramatic. Just a place where he felt comfortable, supported, and understood. That gave her a few hours to breathe, to rest, to be human. Those hours matter more than people realize. I thought back to the moment in the courtroom when she said she hadn't slept properly in years. I thought about how exhaustion changes the way you see the world, how it narrows your vision until all you can do is survive. And I felt grateful that the system hadn't added to that burden. Later that month, I received a handwritten note. It wasn't long, just a few lines. It was from her. She wrote that she didn't know how to express what that day had meant to her. She wrote that being helped instead of punished had given her the strength to ask for help elsewhere. She said it made her feel less invisible. That word again, invisible. I folded the note carefully and set it aside. I keep a small drawer in my desk for reminders, not many, just enough to remember why this work matters on the days when it feels heavy. That evening, when I got home, my wife could tell something was on my mind. After all these years, she knows when a case has followed me home. I told her about the note. I told her about the progress. She listened quietly, then said something simple. She said, "Sometimes helping one person teaches them how to help themselves." She was right. I also thought about the son, about how his world depended so completely on his mother's stability, about how a fine enforced without understanding could have sent shockwaves through his life that no court could ever repair. That's something people don't always consider, Punishment rarely affects only the person standing at the podium. It reaches children, families, caregivers, lives that never appear in the case file. Before I move toward the final part of this story, let me pause and ask you something. Have you ever seen how a little understanding at the right moment can change everything? Or have you ever needed that understanding yourself? Leave me a comment. I really do read them. And if you're still with me, hit that like button for me. As the months went on, the case faded into memory, but the lesson stayed fresh. It reinforced something I've believed my entire career. Justice isn't weakened by compassion, it's strengthened by it. I've seen what happens when courts become rigid machines. People stop trusting them. They stop engaging. They stop trying. But when courts listen, when they acknowledge context, something different happens. People rise to the expectation that they've been treated fairly, that Mother did exactly that. I've also seen how caregivers, especially those caring for special needs children, are often judged by standards that ignore reality. They're expected to be perfect, tireless, unbreakable. But they're human, and when the system recognizes that humanity, it doesn't excuse responsibility, it supports it. That distinction matters. I thought again about my father, about how he taught me that the law should never be used as a hammer when a hand is what's needed. He believed that justice should leave people better than it found them whenever possible. This case did exactly that. As I look back now, I realize this wasn't just a story about a mother and her son. It was a story about whether the justice system sees caregiving as a contribution or an inconvenience, about whether we recognize invisible labor when it stands right in front of us. In the final part of this story, I want to bring everything together. I want to reflect on what this family taught me, why helping instead of punishing was the right choice, and why compassion, when applied wisely, is one of the strongest tools justice has. I think about that day often, especially when I remind myself why I still sit on this bench after more than 40 years. It wasn't a loud case. It didn't involve anger or arguments, but it carried a kind of truth that stays with you long after the courtroom empties. That mother didn't walk into my courtroom asking to be excused from responsibility. She walked in carrying a life most people never see. She carried it quietly, patiently, without complaint. And the moment she stood there with her son holding on to her, I knew this case was about more than a missed payment. It was about whether the justice system recognizes love when it sees it. I've said many times that the law is not meant to be blind to reality. It's meant to serve it. And reality, that day, was a woman who had given every ounce of herself to care for her child, still showing up, still trying to do the right thing, even when she was exhausted beyond words. Helping her instead of punishing her didn't weaken the law. It strengthened it. My father used to tell me that power should always be paired with responsibility. When you have the power to punish, you also have the responsibility to understand. That lesson has guided me through thousands of cases, but it rang especially true that day. When I looked at her son and saw how completely he depended on her, I understood something clearly. Justice that ignores consequences beyond the defendant isn't justice at all. Punishing her would have punished him too, and he had done nothing wrong. That matters. Over the years, I've seen too many caregivers pushed to the breaking point by systems that don't account for the invisible work they do. They're expected to hold everything together without ever dropping anything, and when they finally do, even once, the response is often punishment instead of support. I refuse to be part of that when the law allows another path. That mother earned help not by asking for sympathy, but by showing responsibility in the hardest circumstances imaginable. She didn't want charity. She wanted stability. She wanted a chance to keep her son safe and her life intact. And she proved she deserved it. I still remember the look on her face when she realized she wasn't going to be punished for something she couldn't control. That look wasn't relief alone. It was validation. It was the feeling of being seen. That's something people never forget. So let me ask you this. Do you think I was too lenient with her, or do you think helping her instead of punishing her was the right thing to do? I'm genuinely curious what you think. And here's another question for you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have enforced the fine without exception, or would you have chosen to support a family doing everything they could to survive? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I actually read them, every single one. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that compassion belongs in justice, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Turn on that bell icon so you never miss another story from my courtroom. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Someone caring for another person. Someone who feels invisible. Someone who needs to know that being strong doesn't mean being alone. And check out the next video on your screen. I've got another powerful story from my courtroom that you won't believe. I'll see you tomorrow with another lesson about justice, responsibility, and what really matters in this life. I'm Frank Caprio. I've been on this bench for 40 years because I believe something simple. We're all equal before the law, every single one of us. But equality doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means applying justice with understanding. Thank you for listening to my story. God bless you, and remember, sometimes the most just decision is the one that helps instead of harms.